Hey everyone! A few months ago, I decided to switch my home firewall from a Meraki MX to OPNsense running on a Qualcomm Mini PC. Been using it for a couple of months and so far having a pretty good experience, but one of the things that I decided to try out on the OPNsense machine was using WireGuard for remote access VPN. And after years of configuring VPN tunnels on a number of different firewall platforms, I have to say I'm kind of impressed with how easy WireGuard is to configure, how well it performs, and from the user side, how easy and quick it is to connect and just get you access to the resources you need. So I thought today I would just put together a quick little video where we're going to walk through how to set up WireGuard on an OPNsense firewall. We'll walk through the installation, all of the configuration, creating some profiles and all that fun stuff, as well as we'll also walk through some of the configuration on the client side. In my case, I have a Windows machine and an Android mobile device that we'll be walking through. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So first we'll take a quick look at the topology that we'll be using for this video. So I installed another OPNsense virtual machine in my lab. On the LAN side of the OPNsense box, it does have direct access to some of my lab resources. And on the WAN side, we'll be using reserved IP range for testing, where we'll simulate what it would look like if there were clients connecting to this remote access VPN over the internet. And as I mentioned, we will be configuring both a Windows client and an Android client, so both of those are going to be configured off the WAN side with addressing that can hit that WAN IP of the OPNsense box. So next, we'll go ahead and jump over to OPNsense. I am running the latest 22.7 version in my lab right now. And the first thing that we're going to need to do is to install the WireGuard plugin. So to do that, we'll go down to System, Firmware, down to Plugins, wait for the plugins to load. We'll search for WireGuard. Over on the right side, there's a little plus icon to install. We'll go ahead and click that. OPNsense will then reach out to the repository mirrors, pull down the package, and install it locally. This process should be pretty quick. Once that's done installing, on the left side menu under VPN, we'll see that WireGuard isn't there yet. We'll just need to refresh the page so that the menu has a chance to reload the packages that are installed. And if we go down to VPN again, we will now see that WireGuard is available to us. So we'll go ahead and start with the WireGuard configuration. And the first thing we'll do is we'll do the local config. So for the local side config, this is going to be the configuration that applies directly to the OPNsense box. This is going to be where we will build a virtual tunnel interface on OPNsense that will serve WireGuard clients that try to connect in. So the first thing we'll do is we will click the plus icon to add a new local profile. And it's important to note that while I'll only be configuring one local profile in this video, you could create multiple local profiles in case you had different segments of remote access users who you wanted to apply different firewall policies and rule sets to permit or deny access to certain resources. So the first thing that we'll do is we will just need to give this profile a name. So I'm going to set this to WG1 or WireGuard 1, which is going to be the name of our virtual interface. When we create this local tunnel, a virtual interface will get created that is going to be WG and then whatever our instance number is. In this case, the first tunnel that we created does show that it's going to be instance number 1, so that interface would be WG1. For public and private key, we will leave these blank. Once we save our local profile, OPNsense will automatically generate those cryptographic keys for us. We will need to pull those out later, but we'll come back to that in just a second. Next, we'll go ahead and configure the listening port, which is going to be the UDP port number that OPNsense will listen to on the WAN side interface for incoming connections. By default, WireGuard uses port 51820, so we'll configure that here. Then next, we'll look at tunnel address. Now, as I mentioned before, part of this local side configuration is instantiating the virtual tunnel interface that clients are going to be connecting to. And so we will configure an IP address on this tunnel, and this will be used as the gateway for those remote access clients to use to reach the LAN side protected resources. So in my lab, I will just go ahead and configure this as 10.50.50.1/24. Now for peers, it says there's nothing selected, and if we open up that drop-down box real quick, we can see that there are no peers available to select. That's because we have not configured any clients yet that will be connecting to this VPN. Once we do configure those client profiles, we will need to come back in here and add those peers to permit them to connect to this instance. Now we will leave the box for disable routes unchecked. Now, by default, when you configure a peer, whether it is a remote access client or maybe another firewall for a site-to-site VPN, OPNsense is then going to install routes in the routing table pointing over this virtual tunnel interface to the addresses on the other side of that connection. If you are doing something like a site-to-site VPN where we're connecting to another firewall, it's possible you might want a little bit more control over how that traffic gets routed, in which case you can go ahead and click Disable Routes, and OPNsense will not install those routes automatically, and it'll expect you to do that on your own or via a dynamic routing protocol. So with all that being done, we'll go ahead and hit Save, and we'll click Apply real quick. And then we will go back into that profile and click Edit so that we can pull out the public key. So we are going to need to copy out that public key and save it somewhere that we can easily reference later, because we will need it for the client-side configuration. So we'll just copy that out and then go ahead and hit Save again. Next, we'll jump over to the General tab real quick, click Enable WireGuard and Apply. This will start the WireGuard process on the OPNsense machine. Next, we're going to walk through a couple of things. We're going to assign the WireGuard virtual interface that we created to an OPNsense interface. And then we're going to apply a firewall policy to that to permit and deny traffic. Now, according to the OPNsense documentation, some of these steps are optional. However, if you want to easily apply firewall rule sets to permit or deny access to certain resources on the LAN side, it's going to be much easier because we'll be able to apply a firewall policy directly to this one WireGuard local policy that we created. So what I'll do is I will jump up to Interfaces and go down to Assignments. And we will see that we have a new interface, and that's going to be our WG1 virtual interface. And for description, I'll just go ahead and name this WG1 as well. Then we'll click the Add button and save. Next, on the left side under Interfaces, we can now see that we have our WG1 interface available. We'll need to enable that interface, so we'll just go ahead and click on that. We'll click Enable Interface. Then we'll just click Save and Apply Changes. There's no need to configure IP addressing on here because we already have that configured within the WireGuard process. Next, we'll go ahead and configure our firewall rules. The important thing to note here is that by default, all traffic is going to be blocked unless explicitly permitted. So if you have WireGuard clients that connect, by default, they're not going to be able to access anything. So we'll want to create a rule to permit some access. We'll go over to Firewall, down to Rules, and then into WG1. And in the upper right corner, we'll click the orange plus button to add a new rule. Now, obviously, we could create complex firewall rule sets here to permit access to only certain resources if we wanted to, but for the sake of my lab, I will just go ahead and create a rule that permits access to everything. So by default, opening up this rule, it is going to be in the WireGuard interface direction inbound. It is set to permit anything from any source to any destination. The only thing that I will change in here is to log packets that are handled by this rule so that I can keep track of what traffic is flowing through. Once we're done, we'll click Save and then Apply Changes. Next, we will need to configure a firewall rule on the WAN side interface to permit that WireGuard traffic coming in over the internet to reach the WireGuard process running on OPNsense. So under Firewall Rules, we'll click on WAN. Then we'll click the orange Add button. So our action is pass, interface is WAN, direction is inbound. For my lab, I will leave this at IPv4. However, if your WAN interface had IPv4 and IPv6 access, you could enable both if you like. Protocol, we will need to change to UDP. For source address, I'll leave this at any. However, if you had some clients that were only in certain locations and had static IPs, you could lock down access to only allow WireGuard access to those explicit IPs if you wanted to. However, in most cases, a remote access client is going to be anywhere on the internet and therefore could have an IP address from anywhere, so we'll leave this at any. Next, we will set destination to WAN address because the traffic will be directed towards the WAN IP address of OPNsense. For destination port range, we'll set this to other and then type in our port of 51820. And I will enable logging again for this rule. And I'll go ahead and set a description of allow WireGuard inbound. And once all that's done, we will save and apply our changes. Now that we've gotten all that base configuration out of the way, we can move over to working on the client-side configuration. So we'll go back down to the WireGuard configuration under VPN, and this time we'll click on the Endpoints tab. This is where we're going to need to define every client that is connecting to our OPNsense WireGuard VPN. So we'll click the Add button, and we'll type in a name. First, we'll configure the Windows client, so I'll type in a name of just Windows 01. For the moment, we will leave public key blank. On our client-side machine, we're going to need to generate a public and private key pair, and then pull that public key off and input it into OPNsense so that it can authenticate our client. We're not going to be using a shared secret in this lab, so we'll leave that blank. For allowed IPs, this is going to be what IP addresses are going to be permitted over the tunnel. So since our client is only going to have one address, I will be putting in that address here. So that's going to be 10.50.50.15/32. For endpoint address and endpoint port, if we had an endpoint that was located at a static IP, we could enter in the IP address here to only permit access from that specific public IP address. However, again, since we're using clients that could in theory be anywhere on the internet, we will leave those blank. In order to finish this configuration, we're going to need to get our public key off of our client. So let's go ahead and hop over to the Windows machine now and pull up the WireGuard client software. Now, right now, I don't have any WireGuard tunnels configured. We do have the ability to easily import tunnels from file. One thing I did want to quickly call out on the client-side configuration is while we're going to be walking through configuring these manually in this video, just to show how it's done and show some of the options, if you had a lot of clients to configure, doing this all manually would be extremely time intensive. So there are a bunch of different tools out on the internet that you can quickly find that will allow you to bulk generate configurations for import, including some tools that will automatically generate QR codes, which is super handy for mobile devices because then they can just scan that to import the configuration and makes it so much easier. But again, in this video, we are going to go ahead and just walk through this manually for now. So in my client down by Add Tunnel, I'll click on the little down arrow and click Add Empty Tunnel. By default, this will automatically generate a public-private key pair for us. And again, we will need to grab that public key in a moment so that we can import it on the OPNsense side. So first, we'll go ahead and name our tunnel, and I'll name this Lab OPNsense. Under the interface configuration, this is going to be the local side configuration for the Windows part of the VPN tunnel. So I'll add a new value for address, and this is going to be the address of our client, which was 10.50.50.15/32. I'll also add DNS servers. These will be the DNS servers that we will use once we are connected to our WireGuard VPN. Next, I will add a config section for our peer. Now this will contain information about the WireGuard side. So first thing we will do is we will add the public key of our OPNsense VPN peer. Next, we will add allowed IPs. This is going to control what IP addresses are reachable via this peer address. Now, for example, let's say you only had one or two networks on your VPN headend that you wanted clients to be able to access. You could put in those subnets separated by commas in this field here and only permit that traffic to be routed across the VPN. However, in my case, I am just going to do an all zeros route, which means that we're going to direct all traffic, including internet traffic and everything else, over that VPN tunnel, which means for the remote access client, anything that they try to access is going to be tunneled over this to the OPNsense firewall and then to whatever resources, whether it be on the LAN side or out on the internet. And then last but not least, in this config section, we will add an endpoint value, which is going to have the address of our OPNsense firewall. Obviously, if this was a production setup, you'd probably want a resolvable domain name rather than a static IP address. But for the time being, I will put in the WAN side IP address of our OPNsense lab device here, followed by port 51820. Once that's all done, we will go ahead and copy out our public key, and we'll save our configuration. Then we'll jump back over to the OPNsense firewall real quick. We'll go ahead and paste in our public key into the endpoint configuration, and then we will click Save and Apply. Now, as I mentioned before, we will need to assign our client to the local configuration as well. So we'll jump back over to the local tab real quick and edit our current configuration. And now if we jump down to peers and open up the drop-down box, we can see our Windows 01 client available. So we will click on it to add that client. and then click Save and Apply. Last but not least, we will need to restart our WireGuard client. We can do that in two ways. One is to go over to the General tab and disable and re-enable the WireGuard service. Alternatively, we can go up to the OPNsense dashboard, and under the Services section, just click the Restart button on the WireGuard service. Now let's go ahead and test our connectivity on the client side. So we'll go back over to the Windows client, and we'll just go ahead and hit the Activate button. Pretty quick, we'll see a little notification saying that the tunnel has been activated, and a couple of quick ways that we can tell that the connection was successful. The first of which being under the peer information. We can now see that the latest handshake was only a couple of seconds ago, and we can see data transfer being sent and received. In addition, if we jump over to the client logs, we can see that we have a couple of messages at the bottom that are relevant to the tunnel being established. We can see that we sent the handshake initiation to our OPNsense firewall. We did receive a response, and then therefore we're able to create the key pair. Now, one of the things you'll see if you're not able to establish a connection is you'll probably see a lot of messages saying that you're sending a handshake, but you're not receiving a response from your peer. That might mean something in the configuration is wrong, or maybe you're not able to reach the OPNsense machine. But in this case, everything looks good and our client is connected. Now let's jump over to the OPNsense side real quick and take a look at what we can see on that side. So if we go back to the WireGuard config, we can jump to the List Configuration tab, and very similar to the Windows client, we can see the latest handshake and data transfer values being updated, so we can tell that that client is connected. In addition, another way that we can easily tell the current status of clients and when the last time they connected is adding a widget to the OPNsense dashboard. So I'll go back up to the dashboard real quick, click Add Widget, select WireGuard, and close this. We'll save the new dashboard configuration. And now we can see our little WireGuard widget that shows that we have one client. That endpoint does match the public key of our Windows client, and the last handshake was just a couple of seconds ago. Next, let's go ahead and configure our Android client. So we'll go back down to the WireGuard configuration, and under Endpoints, we'll click Add. We'll follow the same process that we did with the Windows machine, so we'll name our client Android 01. We'll leave public key blank for now. We'll configure the allowed IP, which is the client IP address of 10.50.50.20/32. We'll leave endpoint address and port alone. And then next we'll jump over to our Android client to do the configuration there. Now, if we click on the big blue plus icon in the bottom right corner, we're going to get a couple of options for importing our configuration. One is going to be importing it from a file or archive if we have one available. We could also scan a QR code, which could make importing tunnels very easy on a mobile device. But for our case, we are going to go ahead and click on Create a Tunnel from Scratch. While the interface is a little bit different, this is going to be very similar to the configuration that we did on our Windows client. So for name, we'll put it in Lab OPNsense again. For address, this is going to be the client address. So this will be the 10.50.50.20/32. DNS servers, again, I will put in one of the lab DNS servers that I'll have access to. Now for public and private key, we just have this little refresh button that all we have to do is click on it and Android will automatically generate those keys for us. Next, we can add the detail about our OPNsense firewall. We'll go down to Add Peer, which will add a new peer configuration. We will paste in the public key of our OPNsense firewall. Under Endpoint, we will configure the public address of our VPN headend, which again is going to be that 203.0.113.10 and port 51820. Similar to the Windows machine, for allowed IPs, I will put in an all zeros route here to route everything across that VPN tunnel. Now, one thing about the Android client that I thought was pretty cool was we do have the ability actually to permit and deny individual applications on the mobile device to use the VPN tunnel. So if we click on this All Applications button, by default, everything is going to be permitted. However, we have the ability to either exclude certain applications that we don't want to cross that VPN tunnel, or alternatively, we can do an include only and only have certain applications be able to use that tunnel. So for example, this could be handy if maybe you had just like a email server or file server or something else like that you wanted to be able to access, but you still wanted all of your other applications to just use your default internet connection. That is something that we could configure here. Once we're done with all of that, we will save the tunnel. We will copy off our device public key and jump back over to OPNsense, paste that in, save our client configuration and hit apply. We'll jump back over to the local config again, edit our configuration one more time just to add our Android client into our peers, and save and apply. We will go back up to the OPNsense dashboard again and restart the WireGuard service. And then once that's done, we can hop back over to our Android device and test our connection. So in this case, one thing that we can do is we can click on the tunnel name itself, and we'll get a little bit of an expanded interface that looks a little bit similar to what our Windows client showed. So it does give us a summary of what our current configuration is, and we can click the little toggle to establish our connection. Pretty quick, we will see our data transfer, both receive and transmit, incrementing, which means we probably have a good connection. And if we needed to check the log, we can click the three little buttons in the upper right corner. And then under here, we can click View Application Log. While it's a little bit more difficult to see on the mobile device, if we scroll up just a little bit, similar to the Windows, we can see that we both sent our handshake request and received a response from our VPN peer. And if we jump back over to the OPNsense dashboard, we can also now see that we have our second client showing up in the WireGuard widget. Okay, now that we have everything configured and our clients are working successfully, I think that's about all I wanted to show for this video. Like I said, I've been using this for a couple of months and I've been really surprised with how easy it is to get up and running. And once all this initial configuration has been done, it's super easy to get the clients to connect and be able to access resources on my home network. So all that being said, I do hope that this video is helpful to you, and thank you so much for watching.